Hi there, everybody. I'm Fred Thomas, and you are watching All Things Bike. And today we are speaking with LifeFlight of Maine. We have Melissa Arndt, Director of Communications, Mike Choate, Flight Paramedic, and a LifeFlight of Maine patient, Liam Summers. Thanks, you guys, for coming down. Thanks for putting up with all the technological things that we just gone through. That's great. Let's start with the big picture on LifeFlight of Maine. It's a critical emergency service that serves remote areas. Explain a little bit about the inspiration and evolution of the service.
So back in 1998, when LifeFlight was started, we were the only state in the nation that didn't have a helicopter EMS system, and arguably perhaps needed it the most because we were so rural and spread out. So the two of our big healthcare systems, Central Maine Healthcare and Eastern Maine Healthcare, got together and said, you know, the people of Maine really need to have this, so we're just going to do it. And so they established LifeFlight of Maine as its own separate company. We started out with 2 helicopters and eventually bought our own in 2005, I think, is when we bought the ones that we have now. The 2 older helicopters that we have now. And we've been in operation ever since.
Right, and so this kind of service was something that existed elsewhere in the country. It was a model that was already in place.
Correct, yes. Sometimes in other places it's a for-profit model, or it might be community-based. In Maine and in most of New England, it's a non-profit model, and they're based at hospitals. They're hospital consortiums.
I see.
Or
right, it's an alliance, and sometimes it's described as being part of a chain of survival. I mean, what's the spirit of that phrase?
So when someone is really badly hurt or critically ill, they need to be getting care that they're not getting, and how quickly they get it and the kind of care that they get really determines their chance for survival, and it determines their level of recovery, so kind of their quality of life after they recover too. So the chain of survival might start with a call to 911, it might start with the first responder on the side of the road, it might start with the nurse at your local emergency department or your physician there. And then from there, it could involve dozens of people before the patient gets to kind of the definitive care, the end of the care that they need.
Right.
And those people might be paramedics and firefighters. They certainly include LifeFlight. They're 911 dispatchers, LifeFlight dispatchers, nurses, physicians, specialty physicians or surgeons at the big medical centers in the state or beyond, down in Boston or beyond. Right,
so it's this whole edifice, this whole chain of experts that sort of operates or swings into action because timing is everything, I guess, or time is of the essence. Well, what about some of the general statistics, just you know, the number of flights per year and the kind of flights that are made, or some of the reasons for the flights?
So we've steadily grown. We started out with 2 helicopters, which we operated for several years. Then in 2015 we added an airplane that's based in Bangor, and last year we added a 3rd helicopter that is based in Sanford. And so when we started, we took care of about maybe less than 500 patients a year for the first couple of years, and last year we transported just under 2,000 patients.
Wow.
So certainly we are seeing more and more patients across the state for a variety of reasons, but and we would imagine that we will continue to see kind of an increasing number as healthcare changes and the population shifts.
Right.
Those are happening.
I mean, is there a seasonality to it, or is there a certain demographic that features in the statistics?
There's certainly some seasonal nature to what we do during ski season and when it's snowy. And believe it or not, oftentimes when Mother Nature is less kind and warms up and then refreezes, and there's a lot of ice on the mountains, that's when they don't fall into a fluffy pile of snow. They end up falling or or not maintaining control and striking a tree. So
Right.
those sorts of things. Motorcycle crashes are fairly frequent in the spring and in the fall when there's sand on the road because of the weather changes.
Right. Yeah. So there is some frequency. There's some seasonality there and event specific.
Correct. But for the most part, the majority of what people read about in the paper, like the term LifeFlight has been utilized as a verb because, motor vehicle crash on Route 302 in Wyndham, patient was life-flighted to Maine Medical Center or life-flighted to one of the other tertiary centers in the state or to Boston for that matter. And the way that
it's becoming more naturalized. I mean,
exactly.
It's becoming part of the service, I think, or the healthcare infrastructure.
And there actually is, we do those calls on the side of the road, but we do a lot of calls from a smaller hospital to a larger hospital. So, and that has some seasonality to it. We're busy all year long, really, but there is some seasonality. For example, MDI hospital, where we would visit MDI hospital probably more often in the summer.
It's more people.
Simply because there's more people there, right?
Right. Well, we'll get to that because that's where Liam was.
The one thing that kind of pulls this all full circle is we have a really unique opportunity as crew members to work alongside physicians when we're not flying and when we're not transporting patients. We're working alongside emergency department physicians and ICU physicians and anesthesiologists and trauma doctors, and they're teaching us exactly how to evaluate patients, whether or not we're in an emergency department in Holton or we're on the side of the road in Seal Harbor in Mountain Desert Island. So it's incredibly fortunate that we get to experience how those physicians want patients to be cared for where they are, and it's part of our mission and vision for what LifeFlight does for the state.
And that's a great point because it sounds like there's a lot of relationships going on, outside of the helicopter in advance of any kind of emergency call. And talk a little bit about the pilots and the crew. How many crew are on each helicopter, and what is the training background?
So traditionally, the crew is composed of a single pilot, instrument flight rules rated helicopter pilot that comes to us. About 50% of our pilots are military and 50% are civilian. 50% are civilian. And they bring an incredible level of calm to crazy situations. So they've flown in all sorts of different environments. They've been instructors, they've been in the military. So they often bring a fair amount of knowledge to the team dynamic, in that the most important thing that our crews do is perform well under duress. And the nurses and paramedics that are on the aircraft all come to LifeFlight with their own specific background, in 3 to 5 years of experience in a busy pre-hospital environment or in a busy ICU or emergency department environment, taking care of critically ill and injured people. But we all end up molding into a specific type of practitioner that's able to work autonomously outside of the hospital environment at a level that, as if the patient was in the emergency department or the operating room in Bangor or Portland or Lewiston. And a few times a year on scene work, we do some stuff where we'll take burn patients or amputation patients directly to Boston. That's fairly infrequent, but our trauma triage system works well. The outreach that we provide for local paramedics and actually game wardens and state troopers actually can activate the helicopter. We've provided them with adequate
guidelines, I think, right? Yeah, I mean, talk about that a little bit, because, I mean, some people might, oh, I got an owie, and be inclined to ask for, this kind of service. What's the
It's
the
both
protocol there?
two-sided in providing an adequate level of education to people that may be requesting us, firefighters and EMS agencies, as well as forest rangers and wardens and law enforcement officials. But when we go out and do get requested from those types of calls, that is the pre-hospital environment. The inter-facility environment, where literally every single transport request for the helicopter is a physician prescripted event. So we are, there's resources for those referring physicians through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, through the Maine Emergency Medical Services. They provide guidelines for which patients are appropriate for critical care transport, and then which patients are appropriate for the aircraft, the rotor wing aircraft or the fixed wing aircraft.
Right, so there is, I mean, if it's a serious injury, the doctor will know. If it's related to the back or your brain, or if it's a child or someone who's very old, then, or a pregnant woman, then there's a good chance that the helicopter will be summoned. I mean, describe your routine, for example. I mean, are you sitting on the base playing cards, and then the alarm goes off and you guys storm out to the helicopter, or are you getting a page, or what's?
So we all carry radios, and our communications center in Bangor receives a call from either a facility or from a referring pre-hospital environment, and they tone us out. They keep us blinded to the nature of the call, so the pilots can make a decision about whether or not we're going to fly.
Because of the weather, right?
Because of the weather.
Right. Okay.
Unrelated, they don't know whether or not we're going for a child, or they don't know anything about what the injury or illness is. So they can make a blinded decision about the weather. All of us get together and we brief about what's going to happen, and at any point, any one of the 3 crew members can say no to the flight. With regards to safety, and that's one thing that our aviation vendor, 7-Bar, does. They provide a very extensive safety backdrop for what we do as an organization, but also what the aviation side of LifeFlight does.
Right.
So then, you know, like I had mentioned earlier, we could be out in the hospital doing stuff, helping out in the intensive care units. Sometimes when the physicians are oversaturated with requests from the hospital, we'll go in and actually help them with procedures, or and learn from them.
So when you're on duty, you're in the hospital.
And then we're all kind of at a heightened state of readiness. You know, and we've minimized the amount of equipment that we need to keep refrigerated or safe, because we carry narcotics and those sorts of things. So we all gather and collect the things that we need, and
yeah, so you're ready to go
when
you're on duty.
Try and get the goal is to try and get the aircraft en route to wherever we're going within 12 minutes.
Wow. All right. Well, sorry, Liam, you've been sitting there so patiently, and you know, a valid question is like, how does this relate to bikes? And it's a good question. It relates to bikes because Liam was life-flighted out of off of MDI, Desert Island,
Acadia Park,
in October, and that's why we're talking about this, because this is an overlap of 2 worlds, and so let's talk about the experience. I mean, for example, Liam, what were the circumstances of the accident, for starters, and what do you remember, and provide some detail. I mean, we saw a lot of it on Facebook, but give us your perspective.
Yeah, I go down every year. I grew up in Bar Harbor, so I'm familiar with those roads, and I go down every year at the end of the season by myself to ride with friends to kind of close out the year. So October, I head down to Bar Harbor with my bikes, and we usually spend 2 days just kind of riding through the park.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's beautiful down there. It's fall, and so you get the leaves and everything. So it was a gorgeous, fall day, and I set out that morning by myself to ride through the park as kind of a warm-up for the day. And there's a 2-lane road, both going one direction as you go through the park. Some sections are one-way, some sections are 2-way. And this happened to be a one-way, 2-lane road, and it's kind of an uphill. And the sun was fairly high at that point, and so I was kind of going up this climb. It's a long climb, and trying to get up it as quickly as I could.
Sure,
I'm not a great climber, so I want to get over it as fast as I can. And so, I had head down, and kind of eyesight was low to keep out of the sun. And I was, moving along at about 22, 23 miles an hour, and never had a sense that there was a car parked in the lane that I was in. I was trying to stay as far to the right as I could to let cars go around me. And there just happened to be a car there, and and I never saw it. And so the only thing I remember was riding, and the next thing I remember I was going through the back of the windshield. And so, you know, one of the things that I never knew was that only the front windshield in a car is safety glass, the back windshield is not. It's just regular glass. And so I went through it. My helmet initially saved my life because I hit head first, and the helmet saved my life. So if you're riding without a helmet, you shouldn't. You really shouldn't. Because you never know. And that saved my life there. But unfortunately, I suffered severe lacerations to my neck, severed the arteries of my neck. And so the next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground, and I could see the amount of damage that was done. My heart rate was fairly high because I had been going pretty hard. And so the lady that owned the car came back to check on me, saw that there was a problem, and she got on the phone to 911. I knew the extent of the damage that had been done, and so I started to do breathing to try to get my heart rate down, because I knew that the longer my heart rate stayed up at the 165, 168 beats a minute, the more blood I was going to lose. And so I started to do some exercises to calm myself down and to try to get that heart rate low. At that point, another gentleman showed up out of the blue and saw what was going on there. Saw the trauma. He had read an article that morning about the incident in Vegas where the shooting occurred. Oh yeah. And that if people had done some direct pressure to wounds, maybe more people might have lived, but people just don't know how to do that. You know? It's hard to assess that. And so he had read that morning, came up and said, "This is going to hurt because you have glass in your neck, but I've got to stop that bleeding." And so he put his hand right on my neck. Wow. And started to apply pressure. I was in and out of consciousness. I thought I remained conscious the whole time, but the timeline kind of jumps around a little bit for me.
Yeah, I bet.
You know, I was more focused on just trying to get my breathing down, and then some other folks showed up. Flight nurse, paramedic showed up out of the blue as well. I was very lucky.
They were just driving down the road?
Just driving through the park. These were all folks who were visiting Acadia, and so I had the luck of the Irish that day for sure. And they started working on me. And then the Park Service showed up, and all the crew showed up there, and everybody started getting to the business at hand.
Somewhere in there, someone had made a 911 call.
So the park ranger, a young kid, I believe, he's a seasonal park ranger, saw the accident or saw the damage and realized that I probably didn't have a lot of time to take an ambulance trip. And he made the call. And these folks, thank goodness, happened to be in the area. They were, I believe, were servicing another call or just on a...
explain the chain of events.
We were in Lewiston. Sitting at our base. The Bangor aircraft had been tasked about 20 minutes prior to the incident request that we got. So typically from the Bangor base to Seal Harbor, it's about a 20-minute flight, somewhere between 18 and 20 minutes. And it took us 36 minutes to fly there from Lewiston. So that gives you a little bit of perspective of how fast the aircraft actually fly, because, and that's the beauty of our system, is we have 3 different locations, but each base covers the other when they're busy. So that's what ended up happening on this, is we responded from Lewiston, and fortunately the EMS agencies on scene were willing to wait for us to get there. They had stabilized him, but they recognized that the laceration that he had on his neck was so severe that there was concern that it could cause significant swelling, which would then impede issues with his airway. And recognizing that he needed to get to a trauma center sooner than later was actually probably something that saved his life. So, in fact, I believe you were intubated for a couple of days prophylactically, which just means they put a breathing tube into his trachea so that the swelling and the immune process could take its course and not have an issue, because if you try and do that later in a situation where when the patient is an extremist, then you run into issues, whereas if you can do it early in a controlled environment.
I remember actually I got into trauma surgery. And the anesthesiologist went to put the mask on me for oxygen. And I pushed his hand away, and I said, "You're suffocating me. I can't have that on my face." And I kept telling him I couldn't breathe. "You're suffocating me." I thought it was the mask. But the reality was that the swelling was so great in my neck that I was losing my airway. And so if LifeFlight hadn't been available to me. If they had tried to ambulance me,
that would have happened while
I
you were
would
in the
not have
ambulance.
made that trip.
Oh, man.
I wouldn't have had enough air. I had maybe another 2 minutes of air
Jeez.
by the time I got there, and then they intubated me, and I woke up 3 days later. So, LifeFlight, the critical nature of them being able to get me from where I was on the ground to a medical facility that could actually handle the trauma,
that was
in a time frame that saved precious minutes.
Right.
Because minutes at that point were all I had left.
So that's the chain of survival that you're getting at. How did you know where to go? I mean, Mountain Desert is a big island, and
so that's part of the outreach education that we provide. Everyone pretty much now has a cell phone or a GPS or some way to provide coordinates.
So the ranger, he said, all right, I'm looking at my Google.
He probably told dispatch that I want you to land in the field next to a certain road in Seal Harbor, and our communications center can pinpoint that on a map and provide that information to the pilot and the crew, and they plug in the GPS coordinates, and the pilots take off, and the aircraft pretty much
knows where
does
to go.
Its thing.
And so when Liam was in the helicopter, and you're working on him, or you're trying, what were you doing? I mean, you had a conversation.
Whenever we evaluate patients, you always start from most generic point on. You always start with airway, breathing, and circulation. So we had evaluated him and felt that his airway was sufficient to make it to the trauma center. Then we moved on, and everything else seemed fine. Although I did make a fun note in my chart that he mentioned that his heart rate was typically 40s and the 50s. Because he's a cyclist. Because he's a cyclist. And I made a note in the chart that his attire and that his bicycle attire confirmed this wasn't his first ride, and that a heart rate of 90 was probably tachycardic for him.
Oh my God. And here's another question: Did he actually ask about the condition of his bicycle?
Of course he did.
Did he ask to bring it?
I'm a cyclist, Fred.
I asked him because I've been fortunate to be involved in cycling. I know I don't look the same as you two cyclists.
Well, you just keep at it, man.
I have a mother-in-law who has been doing the trek for 16 years, and she has developed a love of cycling in both of my boys and my wife. So we've done the trek. So I try and as an advocate for patients, try and ease their mind.
Exactly.
So we talked. I assured him that I was going to let his wife know when we got there that everything. Where things were going to go and what to expect, and we talked about a few other things in flight, and of course, most of the patients that we transport, we can't interact with them on that sort of a level.
Right.
They're either so acutely ill that they can't speak, or they have a breathing tube, but we were able to talk, and he got some pretty good pictures.
The best part was I'd never been in a helicopter before,
you got a ride.
I got in there, and he's awesome. He was so easy to talk to, and he actually. When he says that they are there to keep things calm and they don't get excitable, that keeps you calm.
Yeah.
And so, again, my conversation with him is kind of fuzzy in my mind, but I know I was speaking with him, and he was very reassuring. He was very calm. His mannerisms helped me stay calm, but I'd never been in a helicopter before. So the one thing I did ask, I said, "Could you take some pictures and maybe a video
Can I
of
fly
us?"
it? Yeah.
So Mike got some great pictures and some great video from inside the helicopter, and it's a great keepsake for me.
That's great.
But the way that they respond and the way that they get in and they perform critical care, and they care for you all the way through the flight into the intake doors of the hospital. Everything feels as comfortable as if you're sitting in your living room.
Right.
And meanwhile, he knows, and the rest of the crew probably knows there's critical things going on, but they don't let you know that.
Right.
They keep you calm. They keep you awake and alert as best he could, probably with me. And I never felt during that helicopter ride that things were going to go awry. When I was on the ground, I didn't think I would ever leave the park. I was fairly certain, seeing the extent of the damage and the amount of blood that I'd lost, that I didn't think that was a survivable incident. When I got in the helicopter was the first time I thought, I have a shot. I have a chance that I could live through this, and everything that he did reinforced that.
Wow.
So.
Well, that's great. Well, true professionals, and thank you, Liam, for going through the event again.
Sure.
For us, and thank you, Mike, and thank you, Melissa, for coming down and telling us about it. I think it's a essential service, and here it is. It has helped the cycling community, and it helps, I'm sure, many other communities too, both athletic and non-athletic, and it's great to know that it's there. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that was a LifeFlight of Maine, Melissa Arndt, Mike Choate, and Liam Summers, a LifeFlight of Maine patient. If you want to know more about the organization, you can go to their website. You can learn about the service, its network. You can also make a donation there, and you can also find out more about the Islesboro Crossing, which is their annual event that they have to raise money for the organization. That's all we got time for right now. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you again soon.
All Things Bike with Fred Thomas is brought to you by Zentis, performance carbon wheels handmade in Austria for road and off-road riding. Zentis, next generation wheels. And Frame and Wheel eBay bike selling services. Time, space, cash. Pick 3. And AD Bikes, the modern face of Austro-Daimler cycling and the bike company of the future.